Is it consistent with her following this law of attraction?
Yes, it's consistent with all of those things.
Is it also consistent with someone who is battered minimizing what actually is going on?
Yes.
And can you tell us what that means then, minimizing?
Minimizing or denying is when you look at something that's happened and you find a way to make it fit into sort of your worldview, make sense of it. So you usually describe it as less than what it was. We had groups in the shelter and outreach groups and individual sessions where women who were abused and I worked with some men who were abused where they would minimize what was going on. They would talk about it as, well, it wasn't as bad as it seemed, or it might sound bad, but it really wasn't that bad at the time, or it's not happening every day. And that's one of the biggest ones I hear. This doesn't happen every day. This doesn't happen every week. This is, unusual behavior, or this person doesn't usually call me names, or whatever that is. Or they don't tell you all the names that they call you. They tell you less than what's actually happened, and that's really common. Why do they do that, though? Well, you have to live with yourself. You love somebody, and you don't want to think that somebody you love really thinks those things about you. So you explain it to yourself so you don't have to feel horrible. And so that probably you're not ready to leave and you don't have to leave. And so if she were to memorialize these horrible things that he did to her, would that be helping her to remember these horrible things? Is that something that battered women want to do? No, most of us don't want to remember things that are upsetting to us. Well, let's just talk about battered women. Okay. Most of battered women that you work with, do they want to remember the horrible things that the abusers do to them? No, they don't. And by memorializing it in a journal that they keep, journals that they've kept since being a young child, then wouldn't that memorialize it for them? Wouldn't that remind them on an almost constant basis of the horrible things that the abuser did to them? In reading through her journal entries, does she talk about, generally speaking, negative things about Mr. Alexander? Does she say some negative things? She says some negative things, and they are general. Okay. Does she talk about then him having harsh words or critical words for her? Yeah, and cruel behavior. And cruel behavior, okay. But does she specifically put things in there where... Did you ever see anywhere in her journals where she says that he called her a slut? I don't remember. Okay. Did you ever see her write anything about that he called her a whore? I don't remember that either. And what about, did you ever see anything in her journals where he called her a three-hole wonder? No. And did you ever see anything in there where she's telling her journal that he called her a bitch? No, I don't remember her talking about name-calling in her journal. None of those specific things in her journals, right? Not that I remember. But yet when you read the instant message between them, when he is ranting to her on May 26th, he calls her all those things, doesn't he? Yes, he does. And so you know from reading those instant messages that that is truthful. Those things happened, right? Yes. But yet, we don't see it in her journal. Yes, we don't see it. No, we don't see it in her journal. Okay. Judge, may I approach? Yes. Or we approach, actually.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break until 4 o'clock. Please remember the admonition, you are excused. Please be seated. The record will show that.
Thank you, Judge. Do you remember being asked questions about whether or not you believed Miss Arias? Yes. And do you remember talking about going into a case with a certain amount of skepticism? Yes, I do. Can you tell us what you meant? Whenever I take...
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the objection.
About this.
Overruled.
When I take or when I investigate a case, I don't presume that what I'm being told is the truth. I need to figure that out for myself. I need to have enough to go on. And there are cases I don't take because there either is not enough evidence from my perspective, or I don't believe the person I'm talking to, or I don't have enough time to do a good job. But I have gone into cases and been halfway through cases where I decided that I couldn't testify in those cases. I have testified for a police officer who...
So when you first are on a case and you say you enter the case with some skepticism until you have some more information, right?
Yes.
Did you do that in this case?
Yes.
And did you have skepticism when you first met with Miss Arias? Before you first met with Miss Arias?
Yes, I didn't want to. I wasn't sure I wanted to take this case at all.
Okay. And after speaking with Miss Arias, was she able to answer some of your questions that you had?
Yes.
And working throughout this case, was there ever a time that you felt you needed to withdraw from it?
Checks and relevance.
May I approach, Judge? Ms. LaViolette, during your time on this case, when you are investigating it and looking through all of the evidence, as you said you've done in the past withdrawn from a case, did you ever feel the need to withdraw from this case?
No.
All right. So let's... When you first met with Miss Arias, do you remember the questions about apologizing to her?
Yes, I do.
The fact that... Why did you apologize to her?
Because I was genuinely sorry that I invaded private space, that people, things that people write and things that people pour out on a page that they believe is private, that's not something that I usually do. And I wanted her to know that I understood what I was doing. And I thought that in her understanding that maybe we'd have a little trust and she would be able to talk to me more easily.
And is her situation different from when you're counseling or when you have battered women come in speaking to you? Are those women coming to you with their problems?
They are, but they generally don't tell me lots of things when they first meet me. It's usually over a period of time when they begin to trust you, and the same with the other folks that I work with. As one of my clients just said, Alice...
So is it different than with Miss Arias? Because at the point that you met her, did you already know a lot of very personal information about her?
Yes, I did.
And information that most of us would consider, in a sexual nature. Did you know a lot of information about sex contact between her and Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
And is that something that is normally kept in private?
Yes, it is.
And so is that what your apology had to do with? So when you went in there and apologized to her, is there anything about that makes you feel like you were biased already for her?
Not at all. No.
Were you ever concerned about liking her too much that you can't give an honest opinion about whether or not she's a battered woman?
No. I just haven't had that come up in a situation where I've liked somebody so much that I can't remove myself. Testimony to me is very significant and very important, and it doesn't matter what kind of case it is. And this case is very serious. But I think when people are talking about losing their children or not having access to their children or losing an inheritance, whatever that would be.
Sustained.
Judge, she's explaining why it's important.
Ask another question.
In your counseling, when you have clients come in your door and you're having your your men's group.
Yes.
And some of those men, I imagine, in the past have done some pretty awful things to people, right?
Correct.
The fact that some of those men may have done pretty awful things and you don't like what they've done, does that make it so that you're not able to work with them?
No, it doesn't.
And when you have battered women come and see you, and you might feel badly for their situation or what they've been through, do you ever feel that way for them?
Yes.
Does it mean that you can't work with them and give them an honest assessment of what they might need to do for their own life?
No, it doesn't.
And did you have any problems like that when you were talking with Miss Arias and forming your opinion with regard to this case being a domestically violent relationship?
No, I did not.
All right, let's talk for a second about a couple of small details from Miss Arias' past, okay?
Sure.
Do you remember being asked questions about a childhood friend of hers who knew her when she was in grade school?
Yes.
And did you review a interview of this childhood friend from Miss Arias that she knew her in grade school?
Yes.
And this interview would have been, because we're talking about a friend of hers from grade school, this interview would have been conducted about 20 years after this woman knew Miss Arias, right?
Correct.
Do you remember being asked questions about what some of the things that this woman said?
Yes.
About Miss Arias?
Yes.
And were you asked questions about whether or not Miss Arias would play a victim when she was in grade school?
Yes.
And then later on, the prosecutor immediately after that, the prosecutor talked to you about something that occurs much later in Miss Arias' life when she is actually after June 4th working at the Purple Plum. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And how did the prosecutor ask you questions about how she acted with men in working at the Purple Plum?
Correct.
Those two incidents from grade school and then after June 4th of 2008, 20-some years later, does that in any way form a pattern for you?
No, it doesn't.
Is there any possible way that two incidents, 20-some years apart, is going to make a pattern in your line of work?
Not that I can see. And not regarding domestic violence.
Okay. And the prosecutor was talking to you about also some of the things that Mr. Arias talked about his own daughter, right?
Yes.
And you said you were trying to tell the prosecutor some of the things that you would want to consider with whatever Mr. Arias said about her, right?
Correct.
What are some of the things that you would want to consider about Mr. Arias?
Well, for one thing, it's pretty tough when a parent has to look at their own behavior in relationship to their children.
What do you mean?
According to reports, Mr. Arias has been abusive with Jodi and controlling and manipulative with his wife, and there are patterns of that. So it would be difficult to have to tell somebody that. So that would be one thing.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd consider?
Well, I consider that Mr. Arias and his daughter had an estranged relationship. So communication between the two of them hadn't been good for years, and that they didn't have regular communication. So what he said would come out of a sort of a limited framework. And after she moved back to Wairika, which was some, I think, 10 years or so after she had left, and they hadn't had a lot of contact.